What are human rights? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What are human rights? Well, the standard definition is a universally or semi universally acknowledged set of rights based on moral analysis of what every human being has the right to deserve in terms of protections of their life, simply based on being a human being. Now, that right, that phrase actually didn't come into common knowledge the way we know it. We go, oh, human rights. Yeah, of course, we have human rights. That didn't come into the popular lexicon until post World War II. Prior to World War II, and for a few hundred years before, they were commonly referred to as natural rights. And that phrase has its roots all the way back in through the Roman times, back to the Stoics of the Greeks, the philosophers. The Stoics posited that one of the goals of human behavior was to make it come into harmony with the natural law, the underlying natural law. And when the Roman Empire developed, one of the things they had in their law was the idea of natural law. Good job, Stoics. So, they said, well, there was the laws of the state and then there were natural laws. And the natural rights were derived from the natural law. Now, as that went forward in time, those people who were saying natural law and whatnot, they seem to have some pretty big holes in the natural rights department, because they allowed for systems of law and ethics and morality that condoned slavery and the attribution of less rights to women and other groups. And basically, for a long time, it's just like the laws of the rights of man. And it was like pretty much full of a lot of holes. And then World War II apparently gave a lot of resolution to a heck of a lot of different issues that had sort of been coming down the timeline. And among them was the merging of everything into human rights. Human rights, regardless of any of the other particular breakdowns. And that's essentially what the United Nations was founded on, was a principle for human rights. And that's sort of like most of the political history of it. Now, most of human history can be read through, it's fascinating at least to read it through or see it through the lens of human rights. Any culture, any time, any spot, if you just open it up and you look and go, okay, I'm going to look at this period of history through the guise of human rights, and then you look at it, because usually the government, for whatever reason, because they have the power throughout history, become the dispenser of rights. The government is, in any situation, is supposed to be constructed and conceived and run on the idea that there's already like a codification, the law of morals being like good or bad behavior, that have been turned into a system of laws, which are really ethics. That's the other thing, the Catholic Roman Empire, they said laws were only law if they were just. Now, that doesn't mean that like they always like followed that maxim, but that was their story, and they're sticking with it. Like, the law is only a law if it's moral, and which is a good analysis, right? So you look at their history, and you look at the government, and you go, okay, they basically have office jobs to enforce these moral codes that everybody in the society seemingly agrees on, or like generally agrees on. And then, hopefully those laws are moral in and of themselves, so that they're just, so that they're real law. And then they're being administered by people that are hopefully doing it in the spirit of what the group of people want. And the idea, then you can analyze it and go, okay, well, now that we know human rights are a thing that people philosophically, everybody has human rights. Like before, so the analysis is like, okay, how much is the government like allowing human rights to be lived out in those situations? It's a great way to analyze any moment in history. Just okay, how free are the people? Like how much human rights are being exercised in this situation, and then you can kind of look at everything else. It doesn't really matter. That's kind of the whole game with governments and the population is how much of the natural, like how much of the human rights that people are born with are being observed and administered to and facilitated. Because, well, as an American, that's the American charter that's sort of unique, is that the idea of the American Constitution is the propagation of human rights, right? And you can see America as an evolution of, they started with that as the idea, and the population obviously didn't have access to all of their human rights when that charter went up as the Constitution. But the Constitution was written in such a way that it allowed for the evolution of the rights of the people to catch up to the stated intent, which was always, that's always been the idea of America. The idea of America was that it was going to take time in this experiment to bring all these people with all these different backgrounds and different levels of experiencing human rights to not only allow for the group to start having their actual human rights be exercised, to be able to live with them and have trust in them, but then also for that system to be administered by people who come from places where maybe they weren't experiencing their human rights. So government for the people, by the people, right? All based on human rights. Philosophically, what are we getting at with human rights? Philosophically, I'd say it's the ability to live out, to live and attempt to live out your full potential. For a human being, for starters, for the basics, it's a human right to not be preyed upon, right? If we're saying human rights are from other humans, we're assuming that you live in a society at this point. It's not, this isn't caveman era. Like in a society, human right, born in society, you have the right to develop in a way that doesn't cause others harm, like intended harm, or deny them. It's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Like they really nailed it, and like you're not allowed to deny others the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, given that they're also acting morally. So golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Of course, unless you're a masochist. they never figured that one out. But basically, you have a human right to like be born and to live and to have access to the reality, to have access to the resources, to have access to living, to have access to not being forced to live in a scheme, right? And that does kind of go back to the original idea of natural rights. Like a human right is a right to live in harmony with nature. And I understand that flies in the face of almost every political system ever created. But as a human right, you have a right to live on the planet that you were born in. And you do have a right as a human to live in harmony with the planet and to live naturally. It is a right. I feel strongly that I feel that that's just obvious, because a human is an animal, and an animal is born on a planet. They have a right to live on the planet. They're born there. They have a right to live freely on the planet. I believe it's a human right to live freely on the planet. I believe when a person is born, it's their right to go live in the woods and build a tree house or hunt caribou or drink out of a stream. I believe that's a right. I believe that's as much as a right as if somebody's born in the city and they want to live a city life their whole life. That's a right, and they have also a set of rights that essentially preserve their dignity and protect their soul from predation. I think those are human rights, and I think any law is really a human right being violated to some degree or another. I think laws are all supposed to be working in unison, in conjunction, to try to preserve the sanctity of the human experience. And maybe that's what human rights are. Maybe human rights are acknowledgments of the attempt to preserve the dignity of the individual human experience. Like a human right could be those things we have recognized to be integral in the protection of the integrity of the human experience, so that dignity and prosperity and love and people can have a chance to actually live out their full life without undue attack or influence, especially when it means being the victim of schemes of others for them to try to like enrich their lives. It's a human right to not have to be exploited. And it's a human right to be able to live naturally, philosophically. Animal born on the planet, seems like a no-brainer. They have a right to live on the planet. Other human rights, I mean, the right to expand your mind, the right to express yourself freely. Everyone has a right to express themselves freely, whether it's verbally, intellectually, emotionally. That's a human right. Why wouldn't it be? If we view this existence as simply like a video game level, and you are a character generated in the game, why wouldn't you have the ability to wander around, roam, speak your mind, interact with the game? Anything that sort of comes in and externally tries to stop that seems to me to be a violation of human right. So maybe basic human activities are covered under that, or protected under that. I think it's kind of common sense, to be honest. Like, you're born on a world, and you have the right to live on that world, and you shouldn't have to be intimidated, persuaded, or extorted into living in some other person or institution's idea of what the world should be. And I think that's a human right to be able to say no to that, and to be able to live however the reality itself is set up for you to live in. I think it's a human right. I think it's a human right to live free. What else about human rights? Yeah, so obviously they're evolving. They're in the consciousness. We acknowledge that they exist. Most people acknowledge that we have them, and most people acknowledge that the world can't. The world will achieve a new level of harmony and bliss when all people's human rights are recognized and everyone acts in accordance with that. So maybe human rights is the key to world peace. Maybe they are. All right, thanks for spending some time here on Philosopher's Corner. Say it was human rights. I hope you enjoy your human rights.